Hello and welcome everyone to the third episode of Energy UK's Mission Possible podcast series. And this one is going to be about modernising homes and businesses. So if we start with Mission Possible itself, so Energy UK have released a publication and really setting out sort of the huge ambitions that we see for the energy sector and how government can work closely with industry and everyone and every citizen to ensure that we can progress towards net zero by 2050. And Energy UK set out 5 key priorities, and one of which is a third one in their list, which we'll talk about now, which is warmer homes and cleaner transport. So to discuss all those things, I'm here with a fantastic panel, if I do so myself. So I'm first of all Sandy Kelly, I'm Assistant Planning Engineer at UK Power Networks and also Vice Chair of the Young Energy Professionals Forum. I'm joined by Olivia, I'm joined by Charles, I'm joined by Jazz, and I'm joined by Louise. So if I could start with yourself, Olivia, for an introduction.
Yeah, so I'm Olivia Smalley, I'm Head of Policy and Communications at the Heat Pump Association.
I'm Charles Wood, I'm the Deputy Director of Policy at Energy UK.
I'm Chester Bassi, Head of Corporate Affairs at SSC, the division that focuses on providing regional clean energy infrastructure. Fantastic.
I'm Louise Evans. I lead on transport policy and a lot of the low carbon tech that's coming out at Energy UK.
Oh great, well fantastic. We've got the right people, it sounds like. And so yeah, as just a background, it sounds like, what it looks like as well, consumers have so much choice now around how they can transition to low carbon generation, low carbon choices in their lifestyles. But that's also come with uncertainty and complexity. And so what we're going to talk around for the next hour or so is going to be how to make that transition as seamless as possible, as easy as possible for consumers. And so if I could start with yourself, Charles, just for kind of a quick overview, I've mentioned Energy UK have their Mission Possible publication, I've mentioned around warm homes and cleaner transport. What does that mean to Energy UK?
Thank you. So the approach on warmer homes, the approach to warmer businesses, more effective, cost-effective energy bills for everybody, it really is about that going beyond what we've done so far. There's been incredible progress when it comes to power decarbonisation in the UK, with a decade in which we were the fastest decarbonising sector in the world. Because of the pace of change, that is now starting to slow a bit as you get to the more tricky areas, but we've also got to now think about demand. How do you transform the way we use energy, how we use energy, when we use energy, what kind of energy we use, in order to make sure that the whole system is as effective as possible. So within our Mission Possible document, we set that out into 3 broad areas. The first of those really is energy efficiency, I would say, as the real enabler, the underlying requirement that we get all of our homes and businesses to be more energy efficient, more efficient about how we use their energy. There's a significant amount of work that's been delivered already under things like the Energy Companies Obligation, where suppliers have been doing a lot of the legwork in just getting those options to consumers. And ECO, in fact, has recently, I think, surpassed the boiler upgrade scheme in terms of the number of heat pumps that are being installed under that measure. So it's really positive to see that moving at that pace and to have expanded to some of those wider technologies outside of things like loft insulation. So we need to continue that. There is a big question with this new government of how you deliver, with a lot of focus on local and regional delivery of energy efficiency measures. So how will that develop? What's the governance structures around it? How is the funding appropriated? And how do you make sure that local authorities have the expertise and the resource in order to deliver? A second area is the policy changes that need to happen. Most people watching this hopefully will be familiar with the zero emission vehicles mandate and the clean heat market mechanism. Both of those need to be progressed at pace. The ZEV mandate's already in place, and we're seeing some positive changes with the EV market just going on leaps and bounds, really. And the second is the clean heat market mechanism, where because of that change of government, we now need to see a statutory instrument, so the legislation to enable it, planted, laid as quickly as possible in order to really allow the market to ramp up some of that investment in things like domestic supply chains for heat pumps. Yeah. Where we've had multiple members come to us and say that they were looking to invest, and because of the delays to getting a market and getting demand for heat pumps, it is so much harder to get that investment at low cost. And there's wider policy changes like things like Project Rapid, making sure there's funding available for public charging, and then getting into really complex areas like heat network zoning, which I'm sure people will come on to later. And the final area is just being clear that decarbonisation is urgent and getting on top of the urgency needed in heat, buildings, transport, all of those areas of evolving demand-side decarbonisation. The previous government, I believe in October, the Prime Minister made a speech that was titled A New Approach to Net Zero. It was very much focusing on that sort of the view that net zero costs a lot of money and doesn't deliver many benefits, and pushing back of a lot of the solid targets that we had that were driving a lot of the growth in things like the EV market. So we need to get back on track and really just push ahead and have some clear targets to make sure that the market can keep going and growing as fast as possible. We know there are fiscal benefits. We know that for every pound you spend on energy efficiency measures, you save the NHS 40 pence, right? And it's billions over the course of years that gets saved. So there's all sorts of tangential benefits that we just need to bring to the fore and show why it matters.
That sounds like an incredible, one-stop shop around everything. You mentioned around the previous government and a new approach, or the approach that they're taking, and we now have a new government setting out their five priorities really. So how have you found, and how have Energy UK found that new start and the work that the Department of Energy to do?
Honestly, very positive. There's a lot of confusion still, a lot of questions to be answered, from everything from what does the GB Energy body look like, to how is the Regulatory Innovation Office going to impact some of the approaches to regulating the build out of some of these devices. And there's wider questions about how quickly do they want to move? Are they focused more on the 2030 power target, or is there enough capacity to do all the things that they want to do? But I will say that the teams behind the ministers and the ministers themselves have a really good grasp of energy efficiency, heat and transport decarbonisation in general. They really are just trying to get as quickly as possible, get to the answers and move ahead. So it's a very positive switch towards a lot of momentum.
Yeah,
hopefully.
fantastic. And I should have mentioned at the start as well, any questions you have listening in, please do put them on the Q&A and we'll answer at the end. And so shifting from the perspective of yourself and Energy UK to sort of private industry, Jazz, how have you found this change of government as well for yourself?
Yeah, so just a quick word on SSE and then go into the new government. So we are, I work at a bit of SSE called Enterprise, so we're a leading provider of regional clean energy infrastructure, so that's district heating, EV charging behind you, solar battery, digital, essentially how you do whole systems approach for local authorities and businesses. And I think just before going into new government, taking a step back, clearly there are some big and mega trends that are, governing some of the things we'll get into today, how we decarbonise heat, transport, flexibility, new things like energy as service. I think zoning in onto the new government, there's probably three things I'd pick out. So one is, this is a government that's really recognising the role of towns and cities in delivering economic growth. It's part of its economic mission. I think that's really important as a point, because for us, we see energy, local energy infrastructure, as a key catalyst for how you deliver those local growth plans. And at SSE, we have a number of partnerships in place with combined authorities to help them accelerate the transition to net zero. And we'll come on to that in more detail later, but that's how you do this whole systems approach. I think, firstly, that recognition for the government of local growth and energy being a catalyst as an opportunity. Then drilling down into the policy specifics, there are kind of, opportunities, but also challenges for us to navigate through. So take transport, huge opportunity with the zero emission vehicle mandate, and the new government coming in potentially bringing that forward to 2030. We think that's a huge opportunity for EV charging infrastructure providers like us to give confidence to the market and deliver at pace. We've got a target to roll out 300, which will be charging hubs across the UK and Ireland by 2030, and with the policy, environment and planning reforms needed, which I think we're getting the right noises from the new government. I think that's a huge opportunity. Another one, but slightly more nuanced, is around heat networks. So currently 3%, but we're working as part of the Heat Network Industry Council to scale that up to 20% of demand by 2050. If we achieve that target, that's a 60 to 80 billion market the UK could tap into for private investment. But to get there and to get that economic prize on offer, we need to work with government to get that clear policy and regulatory pathway to unlock that investment needed. Okay. So, that's getting, as alluded to in the intro, heat network zoning, getting the new regulatory model in place in a way that attracts investor confidence. But there are some nitty-gritty challenges as well we need to work through, such as currently the cost of low-carbon heat is higher than fossil fuel heat. So how do we look at things like rebalancing mechanisms to get the costs down? And my last point, I think, is how do all of these things knit together? There's a huge, I think, revolution in the architecture in the delivery of local energy infrastructure, which will impact how we heat our homes, how we transport, how we power local energy infrastructure systems. So, how would a combined authority's local energy plan interact with, the regional energy strategic planners? We've got GB Energy with its local power plan. For a developer like us, how all these things knit together and how we can navigate that is really important for us to give confidence and ultimately help the government achieve what it's looking to do, which is to drive growth and meet its decarbonisation targets.
I think it's super interesting as well, I'd like to bring in as well, around the heat pumps, heat networks, just heat in general. Like I guess I think of heat as putting fire under the boiler, heat comes out. We've talked around the regulatory side of what needs to maybe happen to sort of move towards things like heat pumps. But from yourself, like when it comes to heat pumps and what you're seeing as well, what the government are up to, do you feel also very, very sort of, I'm going to, present the views you said as being quite positive in terms of, and encouraging at least?
Yeah, so I think just to give a bit of background to who the HPA are and who we represent. So we represent over 100 members in the sector, and that's anyone from heat pump manufacturers, about 85% of those supplying to the UK market, to installation businesses, training providers. So that helps because, in my role and the team's role, we can really get a good sort of cross-section of what the supply chain needs. I think just reflecting on the market and where it's at currently, so last year we saw just over 60,000 factory gate sales of heat pumps into the UK. The government's target is 600,000 by 2028, so that's a big increase. Yeah. And going further than that, the CCC's target is 750,000 by the same time. But I think a positive, looking back at our data, is that over the past sort of 6 months, if you compare the past 6 months of 2024 to the past 6 months of 2023, there was a 40% increase in sales. So it shows that the market is growing. But I think there are a few things, sort of major things that we'd say are needed to sort of boost it a bit more and boost that consumer demand and unlock certain sort of policy enablers that will spur that. So I think a primary thing for us, and Jazz mentioned, is the spark gap, so the ratio between electricity and gas prices.
Okay. Yeah.
So currently in the UK it's more towards sort of a 4-to-1 ratio.
Yeah.
Right.
I think if you want cost parity with a gas boiler, maybe it needs to be closer to the 3-to-1 ratio. And if you want sort of heat pumps to be even cheaper than a gas boiler, you're probably looking at the 2-to-1 ratio. Now there are sort of, our recommendation would be for the government to just get a consultation out on that. And there are ways to do it, whether it's looking at the levies and how they're applied to electricity and, it's disproportionate to gas. Or there are also options of sort of like a standardised interim tariff. So we've seen over the past year a lot of energy suppliers implement that themselves, which obviously means that the price of electricity is cheaper for your heat pump. And even with heat pumps being, I think, 300% efficient, it's really important to get to focus on that running cost. And that consultation would really help, because I think it's important that heat pumps are not only environmentally good and a good sell there, but also economically viable for a consumer.
Yeah, just picking up on that as well. So you've mentioned a 40% increase, which is really positive. Do you have a view of what the drivers are? Why are people now maybe taking up heat pumps at a faster rate than they have been in the past? And that's a question to everyone really as well. But I'll start with yourself.
I can start. So I think they are becoming more popular, and there's schemes like, I don't know if you've seen Nesta's scheme. They do sort of a visit a heat pump, and it's things like if your neighbour gets one installed, then your neighbour might talk to you about it, and they say, it works really well and it keeps us warm and it's not noisy. So I think that there is an increase, and that's that. But there are many things that I think still need to be done to obviously reach that 600,000 100,000 target.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of touch points where consumer engagement and the sort of process of figuring out, is this the right decision for me personally, has been helped, has been nudged in the right direction. Throughout COVID, we saw a massive uptick in the number of people who were searching things like electric vehicles and heat pumps, energy efficiency, because they had a lot of time at home and they were like, oh, my house is really heated. Or they were spending time in their neighbourhood and they realised, oh, actually quite nice when there's not so many cars throwing out pollution. And then following that, we immediately had a gas price crisis that made a lot of people look at their home heating and say, oh, well, it actually stacks up now. It's not the way we want that balance of costs to happen, but it happened. And there is that desire from people to move quite quickly. There is a general public acceptance and desire to decarbonise. So when you give them the right tools like the boiler upgrade scheme and eco, to enable them to afford that upfront cost, it just makes it that much easier for them to make the right decision, really.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, or to, I guess reinforce, whether it's buying a heat pump or whether it's buying an EV, I think clearing consistent communication with the government, working with industry to give those consistent messages to consumers is key. And if you take EVs, or to go back, to an example in the past, diesel vehicles and the contradictory messages there, I think it's important that messaging about that pathway and decisions about what are the options, what are the affordable options, and when to purchase when, and the touch points. I think that's key, and I think that's something government would need to work with industry on here, regardless. I think there's a whole range of areas.
And as a follow-up question as well to yourself, Jazz, when it comes to offerings that you have or industry can provide to consumers, are you seeing more of like the bundled opportunities? So going in once and saying into a dwelling or a business and saying, here's your domestic battery, here's your solar panels, here's your heat pump, and do you think that's a positive step, or still has value in being disaggregated depending on the person?
Yeah, so I guess from our business working with these industrial business customers. I think what we're seeing, particularly to the point about following the energy price crisis, I think we're seeing, particularly from a lot of energy-intensive consumers, interest in things like CPPAs, those kind of bundled products offerings to decarbonise their systems, and I think that's a good thing. So we're seeing opportunity. I think the challenge, and I wouldn't say this is just a government thing, but I think having the right financial models in place to enable those solutions is potentially tricky. Let's just take a hypothetical example. We work a lot with steelworks. We want to help them decarbonise some of their operations. One of the challenges is actually you want to do a CPPA, but actually what products are there out there to underwrite that investment if said consumer were to default in the future. So I think there's a lot of interest, but I think there's question over what are the models in place to enable some of these bundled solutions to be delivered at place.
Oh, yeah, interesting. And then you mentioned about electric vehicles, and so Louise, I can come to yourself around transport. So in Energy UK's Mission Possible document, one of the highlights of that, the priority that we're discussing now, is around decarbonisation of transport as quickly as possible. So what does that mean, and do we get a sense of how quickly that could happen, phasing out in ICE vehicles, but then also do you mind explaining what ICE stands for as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot that can into the industry, as we all know.
Well, the first webinar we did, I think I mentioned there was an acronym conga line. So if we can get, if we can string 6 in a row, we'll have bested the first one.
Well, this is the Z mandate because of the Z, so we're going straight to the end of the
Perfect.
alphabet.
Yeah.
The zero emission vehicle mandate. So we've now seen it passed into law that by 2035. 100% of new cars and new vans have to be zero emissions. So that's a really impressive piece of policy to have got that in place. There's obviously a lot of issues with that. We've seen some uncertainty. Labour are talking about bringing it forward. So we need to get that. If that's going to be the direction of travel, we need to see that as soon as possible, so we can get the right business plans in place to get those zero emissions in place, those zero emission vehicles in place. So we've just hit 1 million EVs on the road, which is a really massive jump. By 2035, we could see up to 20 million cars on the road that are electric. So if we want to get that, which is a really important push towards decarbonising transport, which is the biggest carbon emitter in the UK as a sector, we need to do a lot of kind of complementary policies that kind of help us to get to a smarter energy system. So we've seen the smart charging regulations come into place, which basically, when you get a charge point, there's a default charging schedule, so it doesn't charge during peak demand. So when you're having dinner and there's a massive demand on the system, your car won't be adding to that, so it'll be charging at night time when there's a bit of lesser demand. So that's really great to see. And we've also seen, as we were talking about earlier, there's a massive the digital spine consultation, not consultation, feasibility study that's come out. It's a 400-page document, so it's no mean feat, but it's really good to see that we're getting digital infrastructure to support the rollout of EVs, because if we want flexibility, we also need that data, and we need strong data to be able to support that. So in terms of what it means for EVs, we can look at how do we plan local area energy plans for with the EVs in consideration. How do we get flexibility? So how are we entering them into flexibility markets if we've got a pool of assets of EVs in connected houses? And how do we get that data exchange so we know when cars are plugged in and when they're not? So really great to see that. We've seen it costing. We're going to see that hopefully coming through, because it's really, really important for our energy system. There's also kind of been a push to kind of try and get assets, visibility of assets on the system, so asset registers, so we know which houses have electric vehicles. And if we have that, it means that suppliers can work out and predict their costs a little bit more, because they know if there's an EV plugged in at night. And if we don't have a register for that, how are suppliers meant to know? And we can then enter them in flex markets if we know which houses have an EV. So it's really, really great. And as part of that, we're kind of seeing, so there's better data privacy, we're seeing better cybersecurity of all of this system, which EVs will really benefit from, because they are essentially a digital asset in a lot of ways.
I like to think of those batteries on wheels sometimes.
Batteries on wheels, absolutely. And then also we've seen consultations come out about consumer consent. So with all of this data, you as a customer own your data. So being able to say, actually, yes, I would like to be part of a study and to help the grid. I'd like to be part of these net zero trials and things like that. That's really positive, but we need consumers to be able to say, actually, yes, I'd really like to consent to that. So there's a lot of kind of complementary policies that really, really help the rollout of EVs, but also are really beneficial to the rest of, heat pumps and home battery storage systems, like getting the data right and getting the digital infrastructure right to help the rollout of them. And that's before even actually starting on the physical infrastructure. There's so many charge points are needed. And just as part of this, we're not reinventing the wheel with it. We're really trying to get it aligned with, international markets, what's going on in Europe, what's going on in America, so that we're not creating kind of barriers to the UK market, and that it's an attractive place to, invest. And we're not seeing these impossible standards to be met. It's, it's aligned basically, but also driving up standards for better consumer experience.
Amazing. Yeah, I guess you see so many sort of cars as well, like brands of cars that are now no longer have internal combustion engines and now moving to electric. I think one big question you always get with electric vehicle take-up is road tax, and how you could potentially be not getting as much with electric vehicles, and is there any thoughts or views on do we need to look at road tax or change road tax? Are there any sort of ideas there, I guess?
Absolutely. So road tax is the one that everyone always wants to answer for. I think probably there's other asks around making EVs affordable. So we want to see a kind of reduction in the VAT on public charge points. So if you've got an EV and you're charging on street parking, that you'd be charged 20% tax on that on street parking versus 5% at home. So there's different kind of rebalancing that we kind of need to look at if we want to get EV uptake. Road tax is a possible one, but there's also lots of different ones that kind of are more attractive to customers and the government. So it's quite a hard one to sell to the government.
And you mentioned
so what we mentioned just there reminds me a little bit of the government's smart systems and flexibility plan.
It feels like
it was written an age ago, but actually it's only been a few years. And so I guess as an open question, we've talked around heat and heat pumps, electric vehicles, domestic batteries. I think the question I've got is, how important is it to, on the first stage, stitch them all together so you can have this smart and flexible system? versus just get them in people's houses. If you've got loads and loads of heat pumps, as mentioned, factory gate, production is up for heat pumps, just get them in houses. Yeah. How early do you start thinking about smart systems and flexibility, as opposed to just getting it in people's houses? I'm looking at yourself, so if I could start with you.
You've looked in the right direction.
There you go.
The first thing I did at Energy UK was focused on the smart systems and flexibility plan.
Oh, there you go. Fantastic.
7 years ago came out.
Oh, wow.
So I've been with Energy UK since then and seen it evolve and sort of fade away into this nebulous list of actions, which is really challenging. But the SSES work did come from that. Those standards have come out of that work. So that was exactly when we should have been thinking about it, and it's making sure that as we build out these assets and as they become more popular, particularly as the larger scale ones in businesses become more popular, where they have fleets of EVs that need to decarbonise, or they have a large scale manufacturing centre where they could be recycling some of the heat they're using and then funneling that into heat networks, or just using it for their own space heating demand. There's all sorts of ways of working that make it more effective and more cost effective, more efficient for businesses and households to decarbonise. So you have to be thinking about it up front. And it's really positive to see the amount of focus on things like bundled services, on some of those new options. And you mentioned energy as a service, and there's heat as a service, and transport as a service, all of these acronyms that came out. But what is really challenging there is you then have the knock-on impact of, okay, is the retail market fit for purpose? Is this actually enabling innovation? And you can see, just based on the number of tariffs that have been pulled over recent years, that it's really not. It's not allowing for a profitable, viable economic model that says, okay, we'll offer you all of these services and technologies, and you pay them off over a longer period rather than having to pay this massive upfront cost to install everything. So really positive to see that government's looking at that sort of third-party ownership, the finance options, and starting that discussion.
Yeah, I mean, we're not sort of in the retail space anymore, so I can't sort of focus on that. But I guess from a whole systems assets perspective, I sort of just endorse what you're saying about planning. I think that is really important in how we optimise those local energy assets from a systems point of view. So, the strategic, the SEC, I always get the acronyms confused. The strategic spatial energy plan and how that aligns with RESPs. I think having alignment on that strategic planning, so that it's part of the guiding mind for network. We're thinking about how we optimise these assets alongside the build-up of large scale kit. I think it's important to unlock the flex and the government's, I think, is it 13, 14 gigawatt of flex. I don't know if that's still the target, but planning is going to be important.
Right.
And how we do that, I think, is part of the wider system reform changes is going to be key, I would say.
Because I'd be quite interested to hear about just heat pumps as well. In terms of where in the country they're being installed, is there a certain pockets of areas where they are being installed? I guess in terms of markets and services that currently domestic consumers can provide, it is rather not manual, but we had the demand flexibility service, didn't we, where we all were in darkness for 20 minutes and got 20p, or maybe even less if you were that lucky. Is there sort of, so I guess, has there been pockets of places where heat pumps have been more popular, and also any flexibility options for heat pumps as well, that you can get involved with?
Yeah, so I think, frustratingly, we collect factory gate sales data, so we don't know where it's going. But if you look on, for instance, like the MCS in stores, you can see where they're located in the country. I think in terms of flexibility, obviously, as Charles said, there is the Smart and Secure Electricity Systems consultation going on now, which is looking at energy smart appliances and how we can regulate for heat pumps to become more smart or smarter. And to operate flexibly and use demand-side response and things like that. And as I said before, there's also those smart tariffs, which are really helping consumers to bring down their bills because the price of electricity is still pretty high. I think there's also a risk of, and more of a personal opinion, there is a risk of overcomplicating it with your bog standard consumer. They just want to heat their home and have it at a comfortable temperature. So I think it's hard to balance sort of over-regulating, but also the government need to keep their consumer information really simple. And things like lowering the price of obviously electricity would do that, because you might not need one of these smart tariffs and you might not need to have that relationship. But yeah, it's quite hard to get that balance. There's also, I suppose, another consumer sort of action. I say it's a small action, but it's not. But reforming EPCs and energy performance certificates, so that when a heat pump does go into a property, the value is reflected accurately in the EPC, because it's certain things like that sort of show, well, this is made a direct improvement on your energy performance certificate, and so there's things like that as well which can help, as well as sort of flexibility and demand side response and that sort of thing.
Okay, yeah. So hopefully we're not imagining a world where consumers will think about, all right, I'm going to get a heat pump in the electric vehicle, and then they get revenue stacks. Oh yes, you can, if you cooled your home by 1 degree, if you put your heat pump in the balancing mechanism, your electric vehicle, hopefully we're not going to get to that point. So it's all got to be quite simple up front, I guess is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. I think the narrative around the impact of heat pumps has had a positive change over the past few years. Certainly around the time of the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, sort of 7 years ago, 5 years ago, there was a lot of this perception that heat pumps were weird. They were outside of what is reasonable to connect. It's not fair to have someone connecting that. And electric vehicles sort of got away with it because you can plug them in with a 3-pin plug if you want to. Certainly don't recommend it, but heat pumps were just seen as, that's beyond what's reasonable to expect for a household or for a business. But now that shift is happening of, if you want to heat your home, you should be able to heat your home. Doesn't matter what technology you're using, as long as it's safe, technically operates within the technical standards required. So that shift in narrative and sense that, heat pumps are kind of a normal thing that people should be able to install, has been really positive to see, and I think that's helped us accelerate at a faster pace within the regulatory changes.
Yeah, because I should have asked actually, Louise,
or anyone, like when you charge an electric vehicle at home, obviously someone turns up and installs your charger. What happens to your actual electricity supply to charge your electric vehicle? Does anything change? You mentioned about 3-pin. Obviously, you're not putting a 3-pin in and waiting, 2 days for it to charge. There's obviously some upgrade that needs to happen.
So it'd be through your supplier that you get the electricity, but then you'd have contact with your charge point operator in terms of installing it, unless the supplier's doing the installation. So it depends on what your offer is and who's doing it. But there's different partnerships between charge point operators and suppliers to help do that.
I think there's a process that's been in place for a long time of connect and inform, I think it is, where you can connect the EV charger, as long as it's not one of those very fancy rapid chargers. You can connect an EV charger in your home and then send a letter to the DNO, and usually the installer or the supplier will do that for you. And I know that some of our members have just stacks of lockers full of the copies of the letter they sent to the DNO and copies of the letter that they got back, just to prove that we have the right to install that and you said it was okay. But that changes for heat pumps. But
there you go. And so actually, if I can come to a few Q&As as well, as we're halfway through. So I've got them on my phone, so I will read them out. So the first one is, so when it comes to, this is going to require a lot of electricity, right? We're replacing gas boilers with heat pumps, electric vehicles. We'll get to maybe a vehicle to grid future as well. So the first question is around, how should the transmission network be upgraded to accommodate newer technologies? So what do we actually need to do to the wires in the ground to make this future electrified future become a reality? That's an open question. It's a massive question. If you know that, probably a millionaire as well.
I'm sounding like on behalf of transmission, so
It's all right. It's all good.
I'm happy to have a whack at that. I think the transmission system in itself, there are some changes that need to happen there. There is a significant amount of work and a significant amount of potential funding that's going forwards in that space. So relatively confident that that's moving at pace. One of the challenges is that the SSEP, so the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan, that is likely to be delayed because of this focus on 2030. So if the targets change, what does that mean? How do we deliver that for 2030 for the power system? So there's a lot of focus on that at the moment. There is a real deficit in terms of the amount of focus on demand. So factoring that into system planning has to be something that we're looking at a faster rate. And there's some really positive work that's come from the sector on that, but it needs to be embedded in the way that we build networks.
Okay.
So the two areas that I'd recommend people look at if they want to know a bit more about how that's changing is the NIC are doing a distribution electricity networks review, so similar to the Connections Action Plan work, just reviewing our distribution networks fit for the future. And the second bit I would look at is some of the work that's going on around RESPs, the Regional Energy System Planners that Jazz mentioned already. How we plan our system is going to fundamentally change in the future, and at the moment we are not doing it in the right way.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so I'm 2 weeks into my system planning engineering, so I'll take notes and I'll get back to you on that. Fantastic. And then the second question is actually around myself, just around corporate PPAs. And so, would you mind just talking a bit about what corporate PPAs are, but then also what are the benefits of having a corporate PPA, additionality, what happens with the regos that you could get from it? Yeah, just a bit of a
do my best.
So
it's essentially a corporate PPA. It's a sort of structured contract that enables us as a developer working with industrial commercial customers. So let's say a steelwork, or let's say a pharmaceutical company, for instance. Achieve their net zero targets by essentially giving access to a range of structured projects. So renewable energy obligation performance certificates, and essentially that those would be traded as and as part of the corporate PPA structure. That is a mechanism that will enable those industrial and commercial customers to save money on their energy costs. They're obviously front of mind for a lot of boardrooms following the energy price crisis.
Because it comes with a price usually, the corporate PPA, so you can say, this is the price I'm going to pay for the energy.
Yeah, exactly. And there is obviously a debate around, how green and tradable those certificates are, which I won't go into.
But, that's another webinar. That's all about, dynamic guarantees of origin. That's going to be a 2-hour webinar.
Which I don't want to sort of go into the weeds of. But, a sense, a big part of our industrial decarbonisation play is providing those kind of CPPAs. What was the other part of the question?
So it's just around, who can get involved in corporate PPAs? Is it very small businesses that can be aggregated into bigger ones, or is it just big?
So it's a range. I mean, we see a lot of, your traditional big multinational companies. My business unit, we have another one, Energy Solutions, which is more customer facing, that has done partnerships with companies like Microsoft. We're seeing a bit more uptake with some of the medium-sized plays. I think for me, looking with a new government and its focus on industrial strategy, there's a big growth market and opportunity for those industrial customers. So as I say, steelworks, glass, cement, those kind of customers, they're coming to us as a big demand for these kind of products. But what are the appropriate funds from government to help underwrite some of those products? I think that is something that is quite interesting. And I guess, with Labour's, with the National Wealth Fund, reform with the UKIB, what options are there for kind of supportive products or creative products to help underwrite those CPPAs? So that's a bit about kind of what they are. I think we see a huge, growth market there. Obviously, we need to see where the energy market reform, which I'm not the lead expert on, goes, but I think positive direction of travel, but I think there's question marks over what are the appropriate supportive mechanisms to help with some of those more, as I say, industrial customers.
Yeah, and I guess maybe, and if I've got this correct, so maybe at like a domestic level as well. Obviously, there are tariffs you can get that are backed 100% by renewables as well. So you can also say, on a domestic level, you can be.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing, when we look at the market, a range for different, more dynamic sort of pricing models, time of use tariffs, that kind of thing, and particularly with some of our EV charging solutions as well. So it's a dynamic market, and I think, for us, with the new government, it's how do we, I think, look at the levers we've got to drive this industrial decarbonisation play. As I say, CPPAs is one of the products you can use, but it's not a silver bullet, and it's not the only thing. And actually, what are the other suites of tools? There's the Industrial Energy Transformation Fund the government has.
Right.
Could that be repurposed to help underwrite some of that? So I think,
Okay.
for us, it'll be an interesting area to explore, I think, with the new government's industrial strategy, I think.
Industrial strategy. Well, yeah, we had a department, didn't we?
Yeah.
Bays back in the it says back in the
Yeah.
day, but it's not been that long.
It's sort of back with a vengeance.
I think just on that point, and maybe you speak to this more than I can, but let's not forget that industrial strategy should also think about what can we make in the UK that is also low carbon tech.
It's not something, to be honest, that I've spoken directly to members about, but I think there's also a part of industrial and also commercial kind of fits in this gap between domestic and industrial. And the commercial policy area for heat pumps is probably lacking a bit. So that's an area that I think the government could focus on, because that's really will unlock a lot of deployment of larger heat pumps. And some commercial entities can sort of qualify for the boiler upgrade scheme, but they've got to be under a certain size of heat pump.
Right.
So that's an area that I think the government could really focus on, and how to kind of provide sort of, whether it's public sector sort of guidance on heat pumps, and help them kind of understand the options that are available, because it's complex. There's lots of different property types, there's lots of different use cases, and it's how can we, as either a sector and helped by the government, actually advise businesses on, this is what you could do, and this is how much money it could save you, and make it quite a compelling offer.
That is the best segue to the next
Oh.
one.
we do have a few electric vehicle questions we'll get on to, but the next question, actually, which is fantastic, is that essentially is a wider one. How can we support the installation of flexible technology, such as batteries, heat pumps, thermal stores, in homes and industry? And if I could add on to that question around how can we support the installation, how could we also ensure no one gets left behind? Currently, systems and registers like the Priority Services Register identify vulnerable consumers. How do we ensure those vulnerable consumers aren't left behind on this decarbonisation journey?
I think I can kick us off. I don't know if you want to come in as well, Charles, on the vulnerable consumers part. I think the government, the previous government have obviously focused on that when they're doing sort of grant schemes for, so ECO, for example, the energy company's obligation focuses on fuel poor homes. And I think we haven't seen anything come out specifically policy-wise about heat pumps from the new government, but I assume that's going to be a big focus too, and it's important. And I think it also builds into the point that Jazz made around local authority capacity and understanding sort of what type of buildings you've got, what type of tenants, that their income, that sort of thing. So there's a big sort of planning element as well, and being aware. And I think that helps at the local level because they understand the building stock.
Yeah, and kind of, I guess, on that, I think it's very poignant with transport, more particularly like electric vehicles are incredibly expensive, and we don't want just affluent areas and affluent households to be able to get the benefits of an electric vehicle, because they bring so many to just health in terms of clean air that you get access to if you live in an electric vehicle street and things like that. So there's a lot that I think industrial strategy is really important in terms of bringing down costs of EVs long term by domesticating the supply chain, domesticating the production, whilst also keeping jobs in the UK. So that's really important that we tie that together and we keep that certainty in terms of, right, the UK is on this trajectory. And then also if we think about kind of affordability of EVs more general, you've got things like point of purchase, so looking to get support for lower income households to get access to electric vehicles. It's something that we're seeing in Scotland, but also kind of making it happen in the UK. And also the things of operation, so tax on charge points, which I kind of mentioned a bit earlier, but just having that conversation about how can we help lower income households get access to an EV, because cars are the most predominant source of transport. Most people are driving cars, they're not getting buses. But then also buses are really important. Public transport is really important. So decarbonising transport more wholly brings a lot of benefits to lower income households, and it helps us kind of get that equitable transition right.
Okay, yeah, quite a lot of my local buses around the Kingston area. I'm not going to say that
Exact address, that would be but yeah, so, a lot of them are electric buses now,
Yeah.
So,
But I think that is the thing that we're seeing it, like London's actually doing really well on its decarbonisation journey, but it's just we are seeing divides between affluent areas such as London versus, north-south divide is becoming a really bigger thing where we've seen local authorities, some of them haven't applied for electric vehicle charge points. So there is becoming a disparity, which does make sense because EVs are expensive, but we just need to make sure that the government is also looking at how we bring the low carbon benefits to lower income areas.
Any more advances on?
Yeah, I think just to nicely build onto that point on, regional inequality in terms of decarbonisation, from our perspective, that's where I think the role of us as a strategic partner becomes quite important. So we have a number of strategic energy partnerships with a number of combined authorities since last September. So to give an example, Greater Manchester Combined Authority, we're their strategic energy partner to help them meet their carbon neutrality target of 2038. So that agreement will enable us to identify a range of local energy infrastructure projects to execute, heat networks, behind the meter solar, EHGV, EV charging points. But then to your point around the inequality piece, as part of that agreement, we're also working with the university, other stakeholders to identify the jobs and skills that we can then bring to Greater Manchester to then deliver those projects. And we've set up a business hub where we want to recruit, working with those wider societal stakeholders, communities from disadvantaged backgrounds to then help deliver those projects. So, we're decarbonising locally to then deliver projects led by local people is essentially the model that we want to try and replicate with combined authorities across the UK.
Yeah. It's about that big group benefit. Yeah, sounds good. And then just talk about electric vehicles again. There will be, but there'll be some types of transport that may be harder to decarbonise than others or electrify. And this question in the Q&A is around heavy goods vehicles and freight as well. And so what are the key challenges to decarbonising, electrifying heavy goods vehicles and freight?
So many.
Well, there you go. Leave it there. There you go. So many. On to the next question.
No, so we've got EVs, but I think we've only got about 300 electric HGVs in the UK. So out of a fleet of about 500,000. So it's 300 is not a lot, basically. So we need to build infrastructure. We've seen kind of the rapid charging fund that was consulted on earlier this year, but that was initially, I'm sure you also know that it was, I think that initially started in 2021 and we've still not seen the funding come out, and it was a 950 million pot funding that we've just not seen.
And just to ask a quick question on rapid charging fund, what is it? I think I remember seeing documents around it being a dig first, dig once sort of approach where we're going to, I'm going to babble on for ages, but what is the rapid charging fund?
I'm happy to take it. Yeah, so it's basically an incentive, government support to kind of incentivise connections to rapid charging funds in the motorway service areas, so the key road network, so motorway service areas and strategic A roads, to make rapid charging more available across the UK. Across England, I think.
The key thing we're a member also of Charge UK, representing the charging infrastructure sector, and I think that the point we make, I think with other charge point operators, is how do you use public funds like the Rapid Charging Fund to clarify their purpose to focus public investment in areas where you can then better leverage that private investment that's already going into the EV market. So motorway service areas, in a sense, fine, but we know the demand is, we know that market is pretty much saturated. But actually, alongside that, our tour routes are a huge growth opportunity. For us and our business model, for consumers or vans looking to get on, having the charging infrastructure in those arterial routes in and around urban areas is going to be quite crucial. So actually, how do funds like the Rapid Charging Fund better focus that private money on those new growth opportunities, so that actually as we're going to that EV infrastructure target, we're focusing finance on where the charging infrastructure is most needed rather than just reinforcing where the existing strengths are.
Okay.
And I suspect we'll see the detail, I guess, on next steps, but I suspect there'll be one that we're following for a while, I think.
Yeah, Labour has said that in their automotive strategy that's something that they're going to roll out. So hopefully fingers crossed that we see.
Sounds good. I guess as well, I was just
going to mention that across heavy goods vehicles, shipping and aviation, system planning comes back into the
100%.
mix.
That's
You've
okay,
got
I told you,
ports,
it's a second week,
airports.
But yeah, ports. Okay, yeah. That's really interesting actually, because I guess where substations are right now. So I guess we're going to have to build more of them by ports, by places that do need to decarbonise and electrify.
Yeah, and luckily ports, quite often you can see some wind farms in the background, just offshore wind. But how do you make sure that they're connecting to that? And are they going to use hydrogen? Are they going to use electrification? Where do you get all of that infrastructure from? There used to be a series of hydrogen refueling stations across the UK and low carbon gas refueling stations. A lot of them shut down because there wasn't the demand. So what comes first, demand or supply, and how do you make sure those are co-located?
With Europe as well, because a lot of our goods will be coming from Europe, so we need to make sure that Europe is also building infrastructure to support electric HGVs. And we're not using different chargers, different driver regulations, different weight of HGV goods. So there's a lot in that we need to just make sure. And just the rapid charging fund is, whilst it is predominantly for electric vehicles, if we're putting in the cable, you might as well make sure that it can support HGV charging, because I think it's something like 10% of charging for HGVs will need to be done along that strategic road network. So making sure that we do have capacity and we're putting in infrastructure that it might not be in the next few years that we see that capacity used, but when we do see more electric HGVs on the road, we have it ready to go.
And to have that strategic network in place, I think for us as a potential operator looking to enter that space, that is really important. I think that, to your point about the co-location, what does that strategic backbone look like, and what's government's vision for that gives operators in the space, and also outside the UK, I would say, that are looking at this market, confidence to invest.
Okay. I'm really interested. And I guess as well, just to remind, I can think of projects that you see where there's electric vehicle charging by an A road or by a road, but also it's got a private way to it, like a grid scale battery, something like that, where it can sort of charge, with clean energy, hold on to it for later. So does this really come back to your point around maybe infrastructure investment? There's been, I'm going to say the acronym, so I'm going to make the mistake of that conga line that I've been calling you out on for, but the ASTI, is it called? The strategic?
ASTI, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so ASTI, I think ASTI 2 is on its way, but it's strategic funding for transmission infrastructure. So things like drawing the massive amount of wind generation we have in Scotland down to the population centres in the south of England. Those sort of strategic spending projects need to be better considered in terms of going beyond generation and demand centres. Right. How do you think about factoring in things like transport data into how we plan the energy system, which is just this huge, potentially really problematic area, but could be really well done. If you look at TfL opening up their data, that resulted in just a mass of people being able to say, oh, well, we can actually track how you can get across London, and we have all this data about people's travel patterns because of that. Okay. So if we can do that similarly across the UK and understand, okay, so how much energy is that demand? Where is it going to be? Where do you stop off on your way? Do you have warehouses that you can put solar panels on? Do you have a port that is close to low carbon generation? And all those questions have started to be asked, and there's a future freight forum or freight energy forum as it's now called, that's looking at some of those questions. How do you figure out strategically planning for transport demand in future? It's really, really, really interesting area.
I have another question we've got as well, actually comes back to a subject we kind of touched a little bit on around manufacture and actually bring in other bits of what government are after in terms of prosperity for citizens. And this question is around how do you support innovation and risk takers within Great Britain and Northern Ireland on heat, on batteries? How do we bring in that innovation and be a disruptor on our shores?
I can kick off. So I think, as I said previously, it's getting that right balance between regulation and also the ability to innovate. So I think UK onshore manufacturing is great. It brings in the green jobs. It brings in, the investment into the UK. And I think when I speak to a lot of our members, the sector is sort of there and it's ready to go, and it's already made the investment in most cases. So it's, again, bringing it back to those key sort of policy decisions that provide a clarity of pipeline to allow that investment in manufacturing. I think there's another side of it where, and I think, you know, we spoke a bit about EV and the regulations between the EU and the UK and those differing. There's also that for heat and heat pumps. So when the government are looking at the energy smart appliances regulations, when they're looking at the possible F-gas phase down, which is a bit technical to get into today, but it's making sure that they sort of align with the EU, because a lot of the manufacturers that are currently selling into the UK are also selling into the EU, and the EU is a lot further in its journey to decarbonise heat in most places than we are. So there's also an alignment of regulations as well, and I think even if you take that, looking at, for instance, the permitted development rights for heat pumps, which is sort of where you're allowed to put them outside of your property, they differ from Scotland, Wales and England, which it just... Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. So there's a few things that I think would help to boost that investment and also the demand of heat as well.
And for broader innovation, those people who have heard me talk about this before might think I'm a broken record, but we're fantastic at coming up with ideas in the UK. We're not brilliant at scaling those up. So we've got all sorts of innovation projects at the early stages, a lot of support for new companies coming in with new ideas, and there are, I think I've seen about 5 new heat technologies that could be real competitors with heat pumps in future. They're all broadly electric based in different ways, but those won't come to the market unless there is that bit in the middle is addressed. And a lot of those companies that are innovating and coming up with new technologies, or even just doing things with existing heat pumps and trying to create a better model of system that has heat storage or solar thermal, aren't able to come to market in the UK, and so they come up with their ideas in the UK and then they sell them elsewhere. Right. And that's the same for the existing manufacturer. I think 80% of the boilers we make in the UK get sold elsewhere. Right. If we can do that for heat pumps, then that's a massive economic opportunity. But you have to have the confidence to invest, just as Elevia said.
Okay. Yeah. If there are no further questions, I guess we've got 3 minutes. So I'm going to ask a very quick fire question to you all, which is that we've had a great conversation over the past 57 minutes, but if you had to wave a magic wand and get one thing, one wish of this government looking forward, what would it be? And if I could come to yourself, Libby, first.
So no surprise, mine would be tackling the price disparity between electricity and gas to make sure that heat pumps are, as I said, both environmentally good and also economically viable for a consumer.
Okay, Charles.
Mine would be get on with it. It's just hire more people, look more strategically, and talk to industry in order to just move at pace. We've got a bit of momentum now with the new government. Let's build on that. Let's just go as quickly as possible and figure out the best way.
Okay. Jazz?
Get heat network zoning in place and properly designed. If you get that done right and get industry on board, that's access to a 60 to 80 billion market for the UK.
Oh wow, okay, that's pretty good. Sounds great. And then Louise, yeah.
Well, you've taken all in mind. Yeah, I think talk to different departments. I'd like to see more talking between departments, so crossing over between cybersecurity and energy security. That would be great to see.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And then mine is all of yours combined. There you go. I'm going to take all of yours. And so that brings us to really the end of the last minute. So thank you very much for joining in the conversation as well with the Q&A and for listening over the past hour. So the next webinar we have coming up is number 4 of this podcast series. So it's a mission-led government set up to succeed. I think I said that correctly. But there you go. So that's going to happen next Wednesday, 12 till 1 as well. And you can register that through Energy UK's LinkedIn and on their website as well. And then we also have Energy UK's annual conference as well coming up on the 17th of September, Tuesday, 17th of September. So speakers TBC, but it's going to be fantastic and I'm looking forward to going myself. So with that, we'll close and thank you very much for listening and see you next week.